So first, let me start with a little disclaimer, because I'm going to be talking about common reactions that I see from sexual assault victims. And I know that this topic is uncomfortable to talk about, but if we don't talk about it, then we can keep pretending that it doesn't exist, right? So we kind of, as a society, put everything that we know about sexual assault in a box, in a closed box, and we put it up on a shelf over there where we don't have to see it unless we're forced to. And some of you do have an open box, and it's closer to you because you've experienced something in your life. And so I want you to know that if something hits home tonight, we're here for you as a center. We have a 24/7 hotline, and we also have advocates here tonight that are willing to talk with you. So tonight, though, I'm going to focus, and I'm going to ask everyone to open up their box, take it off that shelf, and open it up with me. After tonight, I hope that you will be able to look at sexual assault in a different way, and you'll be able to look at this box more often. So in order to get you there, I'm going to help share with you, I'm going to share with you 3 things. First, I'm going to share with you how the brain reacts to trauma, what that means for how victims automatically react, and how often we misunderstand these reactions. So before I do that, I'm going to start with a survivor story. So think back to a time where there were no cell phones. Okay, picture a woman who's 19 at this time, and she needs to make a phone call, so she gets to a payphone, but she can't find her money. So she decides to ask someone nearby, a man, to borrow 50 cents from him. And she does, and he's very friendly. He is non-intimidating. He reminds her of a smaller version of her brother. So he says that he lives across the street and he could let her use his phone. So of course she's leery, but she's thinking it'll only take 2 minutes, she'll be careful, and she could definitely fight him if she needed to. So she follows him inside and he sexually assaults her. She is so in shock at what's happening that she zones out, she tries not to move, and she's completely silent. And then afterwards, she stays to use the phone, and she thanks him before leaving. Yes, Madonna, the actual pop icon music Madonna, then goes years and years without telling anybody about her sexual assault. Now, I had to use some assumptions with the details of her story, but even so, the reaction that I portrayed here and the behavior afterwards is very common. So we're probably looking at this and we're having tons of questions, right? Why didn't she fight? Why didn't she say no? Why did she stay to use the phone? And having these questions come to mind is very common, okay? I actually hear victims ask this all the time because this is what they want to do, to be able to fight and run. And I'm sure that's exactly what Madonna wanted to do. So the problem, though, with questioning these things is that in questioning their reactions afterwards is that it unintentionally blames them, causing them more pain. And the fact of the matter is that these questions are not trauma-informed. People are not accounting for the brain's physical and chemical reaction to trauma. The reality is that during an assault, victims have no control over how they're going to react because of how their brain automatically reacts for them. So let's start by looking at how victims' reactions are automatic. So my husband and I just bought a new car. It's a Fusion hybrid. It's very cool. It's unreal, actually. It runs on a massive battery while you're in town, and then when I speed up, the engine automatically kicks in. Well, our body is very similar. When our body perceives a threatening situation, there's this huge switch that takes place. And just like in my car, I have control on the outside, on the inside, I don't have control of that. It just happens on its own. Our brain is the same way. Automatically, there's this switch from our everyday normal brain processes to this survival mode. And in this new mode, 2 things happen. Our prefrontal cortex gives way to our brainstem, and then there are also some specific chemicals that are released. So let's first look at the parts of the brain that I'm talking about here. During this switch, our prefrontal cortex is like my car battery. It gives way to our brainstem. So let me give you an example of what this looks like when our prefrontal cortex is less active, because this is the part of the brain that controls our higher order thinking. I was in a car accident a while ago, and what are you supposed to do right after a car accident? You should call the cops, and you should call your immediate family. Now, what did I do? I stood there thinking that the police would just magically come to my rescue. Okay? And I also forgot to call my husband for a few hours. And I can laugh about it now, but this is actually an indicator of how our brain reacts to trauma. And this is so widely understood that even many insurance companies will put a list of what to do after an accident right on the back of your insurance card, because they know that people are not going to be thinking clearly because of the trauma. So when we heard Madonna's story, she froze, she stayed to use the phone. She wasn't trying to make a plan and trying to put that into action because her prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that helps us to do these things, wasn't fast enough. This switch, like in my car, had flipped, and she was in her survival mode. So in this survival mode, our brainstem takes over. So our brainstem is where all of our automatic reactions take place. This is the part of the brain that helps us, tells our body to breathe, it controls our heart rate, and a list of other things that we just have no control over. So if I were to ask all of you to stand up and do some jumping jacks, and I won't, you wouldn't be able to control your heart rate from going up. Your brainstem's automatically doing that. And this holds true for sexual assault victims as well. Our brainstem does what is necessary for survival. So for example, in these moments, victims' brainstems may deem it necessary to let their body go limp or temporarily engage in the assault. Our brainstem is also helpful in allowing victims to dissociate from the trauma as well. And the thing that we need to remember about these reactions is that they're happening at an automatic level. The switch has been flipped, like in my car, to help them and protect them from further psychological and physical harm. So as if these chemicals aren't enough, or as if this switch from voluntary to automatic isn't enough, our body also releases 2 pairs of chemicals. So our body always has these chemicals, but in a trauma, our brain and our body decides how much or how little gets released. So remember how my hybrid car runs on this battery while I'm in town? Well, if I'm going up a steep hill, the engine is going to kick in to make sure that we get it up the hill. The same way, our body releases these chemicals depending on the situation, to make sure that we survive. So the first pair are catecholamine and corticosteroids. In higher amounts, these 2 work as natural adrenaline. They give victims the energy that they need to fight or to flee the situation. And this is what they hope for, okay? And sometimes it happens. But other times, our body releases less than normal amounts. So then there isn't that energy for them to be able to do that, and they're more submissive to their assailant, which could increase their chances of survival, like we saw with Madonna when she froze up. The second pair of chemicals are opioids and oxytocin. These work together to help us cope emotionally with the emotional pain and the physical pain. So in high amounts, victims are going to be very calm, unemotional, apathetic, and they may experience little to no pain during or afterwards. So on the other hand, though, when our brain releases less chemicals of these 2, this is going to be associated with strong emotions, so very intense sadness or anger, for example. How do we expect victims to appear? Emotional, right? But this is actually less common. It's more typical for them to be have very flat emotions. And this makes sense from a survival perspective, doesn't it? Our chemicals that are released from our body help us and protect us from additional harm. And that's why Madonna, feeling numb, probably just made that phone call and calmly was able to walk away. So in summary, this brainstorm of how our brain physically and chemically reacts to trauma is a gift in many ways. It means that more victims survive. However, the inability for them to be able to fight, flee, have these strong emotions is a heavy burden for them to carry. And even more so when we as a society blame them for something that they really cannot control, on top of their self-blame. So if you don't take anything away from tonight, I want you to take away the fact that when we experience a trauma, these things are automatic. They're not under their control. So let me close by saying thank you for taking that box off the shelf and opening it with me, to actually see the brainstorm that victims all around us experience. I would encourage you to keep that box closer to you. You don't and not put it up on that dusty shelf. You don't have to have it open all of the time, but if you do have an opportunity to be able to open it up and look at it, I hope that you will be able to share what you've learned tonight so that we can become because by passing on this information, we can become a society that better supports victims on their journeys to becoming survivors. Thank you.